I've been looking at a lot of these accounts lately for near-death experiences, and usually I'm looking for the big stuff, the lights, the big messages. But today, I can't stop thinking about one very specific number, 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how long Rosa was gone. It's not a long time if you're waiting for a bus or heating up a cup of tea, but in the world of the heart, it's a lifetime. Rosa is 72, a retired seamstress from San Antonio, and she sent me her story just a few days after she got home from the hospital. I'm Elsie, and I've spent a long time sitting with stories like this one. They keep teaching me something I can't quite name yet, and Rosa's, well, it's different. She doesn't talk like a person who saw a dream. She talks like a woman who walked into another room and found the furniture was more real than what she had at home. She talks about the seams of things. I wanted to share this with you because of how she describes the beginning. She doesn't start with the hospital or the pain. She starts somewhere else entirely. The first thing I remember, and I know this is the wrong way to tell it, I should start with the tea, or the way Maria was looking at me. But the first thing was the smell of the cedar. It was dry. You know that smell in San Antonio, right before a big storm breaks, when the wind kicks up the dust and the old cedar trees in the hills start to groan? It was that. I was standing on a ridge. My feet were bare, and I could feel the grit of the dirt under my heels. It was warm. I wasn't cold anymore. My chest didn't feel like someone had tightened a steel band around my ribs. I just stood there, looking down at a line of trees. I had this thought. Right then, I noticed the hem of my dress. It was a simple thing, cotton, but I looked at the stitching. I've spent 50 years at a sewing machine, and I can tell you if a bobbin is loose just by the sound of the needle hitting the plate. I looked at the hem of that dress, and I thought, this is a perfect stitch. No tension issues, no fraying. It was the most solid thing I had ever seen. But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. I should tell you about the living room. It was a Tuesday. No, it was a Wednesday. Maria had come over to help me with the laundry because my legs have been acting up, swelling like rising dough. We were sitting there, and the TV was on some game show. The noise was irritating me. Everything felt too tight. My skin felt too tight for my body. I remember Maria was wearing this blouse, a floral print, but the pattern didn't line up at the seams. It's a small thing, I know, but it was bothering me. I wanted to reach out and fix it. I told her, Maria, that shirt is lopsided. And she laughed. She has that loud, bright laugh that usually makes me smile, but this time it sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Then the tug came. It wasn't a sharp pain, not at first, it was a pull. Imagine a thread caught on a nail, and you keep walking and you can feel the fabric stretching, getting thinner and thinner until you know it has to snap. That was my heart. I tried to take a breath, but the air felt like it was made of wool. I couldn't get it down. Maria's face, she stopped laughing. I saw her mouth move. She was saying my name, but the sound was getting pulled away from me. The room started to fray at the edges. You ever see an old curtain that's been in the sun too long? How the fabric just turns to dust if you touch it? That was the walls of my house. They were just dissolving. I didn't fall. Or maybe I did, but I didn't feel the floor. I felt a great weight lift off me. It was like taking off a heavy winter coat after walking for miles. I was just out. And then there was the ridge. I've heard a few people from similar backgrounds describe this almost the same way Rosa does. She spent her life working with her hands, looking at the fine details of how things are put together, and it's like she carried that eye with her into the experience. Most people say the other side is blurry or misty, but for Rosa, it was the living room that was falling apart and the ridge that was solid. I've been wondering if that's about the words we're given or the thing itself. Why would a seamstress see a perfect stitch on a hem when she's supposed to be dead? It makes me wonder if we see the world as it really is, only when we're leaving it. I wasn't alone on that ridge for long. I didn't have to look around to know he was there. You know when someone is standing behind you. I turned around, and the dust was kicking up around his feet. It was Jesus. I don't know how I knew. I've seen the pictures in the church, the ones with the soft hair and the blue eyes, but this wasn't that. This was a man who looked like he had spent his whole life in the sun. His skin was dark, lined like old leather, and his eyes, they weren't soft. They were heavy. They had this weight to them, like he was looking at every stitch I had ever made, every lie I had ever told Maria, every time I had stayed silent when I should have spoken. But he wasn't angry. He was just there, truly there. He was wearing a robe that was the color of unbleached linen. I noticed the hem of it. It was dusty. There was real dirt on the fabric. That's what got me. I thought, if this is a dream, why is there dirt on his clothes? Dreams are clean. Dreams don't have grit. He didn't move his lips, not at first, but I heard him. It wasn't a voice like you hear with your ears. It was a voice that sat right in the center of my chest, where the pain had been. "Rosa," he said. I couldn't say anything back. I felt like a child who had been caught doing something she shouldn't. I just looked at my feet. "You have to go back," he told me. I didn't want to. My legs didn't hurt there. I could breathe. The air smelled like cedar and rain. Why would I go back to that room with the lopsided blouse and the game show noise? I reached out, I don't know why, but I reached out to touch the sleeve of his robe. I wanted to feel the weave of the cloth. He stepped back just a little. "Not yet," he said, "but you have to see something first. You have to tell them. They are praying for the wrong things, Rosa. They are asking for a mending when they should be preparing for the tear." Suddenly, the ridge wasn't just a ridge anymore. It felt like the ground beneath us became thin, like a piece of silk you can see through if you hold it up to the light. He pointed down, through the ground, and I saw the world. But it wasn't the world I knew. I saw cities, but the lights were flickering. I saw people running, but there was no sound. It was like watching a silent movie where the film is starting to melt in the projector. "Look at the patterns," Jesus said. I looked. I saw a man. He was standing on a stage, and he was beautiful. His suit was perfect. His hair was perfect. When he spoke, the people in the crowd, thousands of them, they moved like one body. They leaned toward him like grass leans toward the sun. He looked so kind. He looked like he had all the answers for the hunger and the fear. But when I looked at him, the way I look at a garment to see if it's well made, I saw the wrongness. It was like a coat that looks expensive on the outside, but when you turn it over, the lining is rotten and the seams are held together with spit and glue. "He's a counterfeit," I whispered. Jesus nodded, and his face was so sad it made my own heart ache. "They are drawn to the finish," he said. "They don't look at the grain of the wood. They don't look at the strength of the thread. They want a hero, Rosa, and he will give them exactly what they want." I saw people in the crowds who I knew were believers. I could see a light in them, a small golden thread that connected them to the ridge where we were standing. But they were cheering for this man too. They were waving flags. They were shouting his name. "Why don't they see it?" I asked. "Because they are praying for safety," Jesus told me. They are praying to keep their houses and their cars and their easy lives. And because they want to keep what they have, they will follow the one who promises to protect it. They have forgotten that I never promised them safety. I promised them the truth. Then he showed me another group. These people weren't cheering. They were angry. They were gathering weapons. They were making plans to fight back. They were shouting my name, Jesus' name, as they sharpened their swords. They looked so brave. They looked like the heroes you see in the movies. "Watch," Jesus said. I watched as this group, these warriors, marched out to face the man on the stage. And it was terrible. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. Not because they weren't brave, but because they were fighting a war he had already won. They were playing his game, using his tools. They were trying to save a world that was already falling apart. They think they are being courageous, Jesus said softly, but they are being disobedient. I told them what to do what, and they decided they knew better. They decided that fighting was more holy than listening. I felt a chill go through me that had nothing to do with the wind. The way Jesus looked at me then, it was like he was trying to stitch the words directly into my soul so I wouldn't forget them. "Rosa," he said, and his voice was like a hammer hitting a nail. "There is a prayer that is going to cost people everything. It is the prayer where they ask me to bless their rebellion. It is the prayer where they ask me to help them stay when I have told them to run. I didn't understand. I'm just a seamstress. I don't know about wars or leaders. I just know how to fix a hem. What should they pray for?" I asked. He looked back down at the world, at the flickering lights and the dissolving cities. "Pray for the flight," he said. "Just the flight." That part about the counterfeit, man. I've heard that in a few accounts now. People seeing a figure who looks perfect but feels wrong. But I've never heard anyone put it quite like that. The idea that being brave can actually be a form of disobedience. It's a hard thing to sit with. Rosa is describing a Jesus who isn't interested in our versions of heroism. I keep thinking about how she said he had dirt on his hem. He's not a polished figure in her story. He's someone who has been walking in the dust. I'm sitting here wondering, if you were in that crowd she saw, which group would you be in? The ones cheering or the ones fighting? Rosa says both were wrong, and that's the part that really gets me. It's not just the evil side that's in trouble. It's the people who think they're the heroes. The ridge started to shake. Not like an earthquake, but like the fabric of the place was being pulled too tight. Jesus reached out and put his hand on my shoulder. His hand was warm, heavy, and solid. I could feel the individual calluses on his palm. It was a worker's hand. "Remember the gold thread, Rosa," he said. And then, right there in the air between us, words started to appear. They weren't written in ink. They were made of light, but a thick light, like gold thread stitched into the blue of the sky. I could see the loops and the knots of the letters. It was Matthew 24. I recognized the numbers first. "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." The words were pulsing, like a heartbeat. "Do not go back for your cloak," Jesus said, echoing the words in the air. "Do not go down to take anything out of the house." He looked at me, and I could see the reflection of those gold letters in his eyes. When the abomination stands in the holy place, that is the signal. It is not the signal to fight. It is not the signal to gather the church and vote. It is the signal to leave, immediately, without looking back. "But people have worked so hard for what they have," I said. I thought of my little house in San Antonio, the sewing machine my husband bought me 30 years ago, the photos of my grandkids on the mantle. How do you just leave? "Those who pray to stay will be trapped by their own prayers," he told me. "They will say, 'Lord, give us the strength to stand our ground.' And I will say, 'I told you to run.' Their courage will be their cage." I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest. It was the pull again, but this time it was coming from the other side. The ridge was fading. The smell of cedar was being replaced by something cold and chemical. "Wait," I cried out. I tried to grab his hand, but my fingers went right through the linen of his sleeve. The fabric was turning back into mist. "Tell them, Rosa," he shouted. The voice wasn't in my chest anymore. It was far away, like someone calling from across a canyon. "Tell them the one thing I told them to pray for." I was falling. The ridge was gone. I was tumbling through a dark space that felt like being inside a giant roll of black velvet. It was soft, but I couldn't breathe. I was choking on the silence. Then there was a flash. It wasn't a beautiful light. It was the harsh, white glare of the emergency room. The first thing I felt was the cold. It was so cold it felt like needles being driven into my skin. Then the pain. Oh, the pain was back. It was like a jagged piece of glass was being twisted in my heart. "Clear," someone shouted. My whole body jerked, like a puppet being pulled by a wire. I felt my ribs crack. I heard it, a dry snapping sound like a twig breaking. I tried to scream, but my throat was full of plastic and salt. "We've got a rhythm." I opened my eyes, but everything was lopsided. I saw a man in a blue mask leaning over me. He had sweat on his forehead. I wanted to tell him his mask was crooked, that the seam wasn't straight, but I couldn't move my jaw. I looked past him at the ceiling, and for a second, just a second, I saw a remnant of the gold thread. It was fading, disappearing into the white tile of the hospital roof. "Flee," it said. I closed my eyes and I let the darkness take me again, but it wasn't the ridge. It was just the heavy, drugged sleep of a body that's been broken and put back together. I woke up properly 2 days later. Maria was there. She was wearing that same floral blouse. She hadn't changed clothes. She was crying, holding my hand, and her grip was so tight it hurt. "Mom," she whispered, "you're back. You're okay." I looked at her, and all I could think about was the dirt on the hem of Jesus's robe. I looked at the hospital room, the plastic tubes, the beeping monitors, the thin, scratchy sheets, and it all looked so fake. It looked like a stage set made of cardboard. "Maria," I said. My voice sounded like someone had rubbed sandpaper on my vocal cords. "Don't talk," she said. "Just rest." "I have to tell you," I said. "I have to tell you about the prayer." She just patted my hand like I was a child. She thought I was confused. She thought the medicine was making my head go soft. But I could still smell the cedar. I can still smell it now, even here in my chair with the oxygen humming in the corner. I'm 72 years old, and I've spent my life fixing things that were torn. But Jesus showed me that there are some things you don't fix. There are some things you just leave behind. I'm sitting here looking at my sewing basket. The thread is the same color as the letters I saw in the sky. And I keep wondering, how many people are going to stay in the house because they're too afraid to lose their cloak? I'm sitting here now, and Maria, she's in the kitchen making that soup she thinks I like, the one with too much salt. I can hear the spoon hitting the side of the pot. Clack, clack, clack. It sounds like the noise on that ridge. Not the cedar trees, but the other noise. The sound of the world being put together in a way that wasn't meant to hold. Jesus was still standing there with me. He hadn't moved, but the ridge felt like it was getting wider. Or maybe the world below was getting closer. I don't know. My head, it still feels a bit heavy from the medicine the doctors gave me, so it's hard to get the order right. But I remember the man on the stage most of all. He was so handsome. I mean, not just a pretty face, but he had this way of moving. You ever see a bolt of high-end silk? How it just flows? It doesn't catch on anything. It doesn't have a single wrinkle. That was him. He was standing in front of thousands of people, and the air around him smelled. It smelled like expensive perfume. Not the cheap stuff from the drugstore, but the kind that costs more than my house. He was telling them that the chaos was over. He said he had found a way to bridge the gaps between everyone. He spoke about peace and security. He said he was going to mend the world. That was the word he used. Mend. But I'm a seamstress. I know what a real mend looks like. A real mend is messy. It takes time. You have to match the thread, you have to reinforce the edges, and sometimes you have to cut away the bad fabric before you can start. This man, he wasn't mending anything. He was just covering it up. I looked at Jesus. Lord, I said, he's saying all the right things. He sounds like the people I hear on the radio. Jesus didn't say a word. He just reached out his hand, and it was like he peeled back the top layer of the vision. It was like taking the shell off an egg. Underneath that silk suit, underneath that perfect skin, there was nothing but rot. I saw the lining of that man. It was black, not like charcoal, but like old grease, thick and sticky and smelling of things that have been dead for a long time. It was held together by these tiny vibrating wires. They weren't veins. They were like sensors. He's not a man, I whispered. Or he is, but he's been hollowed out. He is the one who comes in his own name, Jesus said. The one the world has been waiting for, because they don't want to carry the cross. They want a tailor who will give them a suit that hides their sins instead of a savior who will wash them clean. I watched as the people in the crowd started to change. They weren't just cheering anymore. They were changing their own clothes to match his. They were all starting to look the same. It was like a factory line. One after another, the same cut, the same color, the same vacant look in their eyes. Then I saw the system. It wasn't a bunch of soldiers in the streets. It was quieter than that. I saw these tall towers, and on top of them, things were spinning. They were watching every doorway. They were watching the hands of every person. I saw a woman trying to buy bread for her kids, but the machine wouldn't let her. It made a red light. She didn't have the right stitch. She didn't belong to the pattern. I've been sitting with what Rosa said about the lining of that leader. It reminds me of a comment someone left a few months ago. They said that in their own experience, evil didn't look scary. It looked unfinished, like a person who was only a front with nothing behind the eyes. Rosa uses the words of her trade, the lining, the silk, the stitch. I keep wondering if that's the only way we can understand these things. I'd genuinely love to know. If you work in a completely different field, if you're a contractor who looks at foundations, or a mechanic who hears the knock in an engine, would you have seen that same leader as a building with a cracked slab or a car with a blown head gasket? Does our work give us the vocabulary for the wrongness we see in the world? I'm looking for someone from a technical or industrial background to help me with this. It feels like a piece of the puzzle I'm missing. I turned away from the woman and the bread because it hurt too much to watch. I looked toward the hills, not the ridge where I was, but hills in the world below. I saw the warriors. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were in these warehouses and basements. They had flags with crosses on them. They were cleaning rifles. They were shouting about taking the country back. They were praying too. They were standing in circles, holding hands, and their voices were so loud they shook the rafters. "Lord, give us the victory," they were shouting. "Smite the enemy. Let us stand like David against Goliath." They looked so strong. I saw young men with tattoos of verses on their arms. I saw older men who looked like they had been in the army. They were brave. I could see the courage in them, like a stiff canvas that won't bend. But when I looked at Jesus, he wasn't smiling. He was weeping. His tears, they didn't just run down his face. They seemed to fall onto the gold letters in the air, making them blur. "Why are you crying?" I asked. "They're fighting for you." "They're using your name." "They are using my name to buy their own destruction," he said. I didn't understand. I watched as the warriors marched out. They went toward the city where the charismatic leader was. They thought they were going to have a great battle. They thought the sky would open and fire would fall, but the charismatic leader, he didn't even send an army. He just turned off the stitch. I saw the towers start to spin faster. Suddenly the warriors said phones stopped working. Their trucks wouldn't start. The bank accounts they were using to buy their supplies, poof, just gone. They were standing in the middle of the road, holding their guns, and they were invisible. The system just ignored them. And then, one by one, the red lights started appearing over their heads. They were being picked off, not by bullets, but by the lining. They were being found because they had stayed to fight. They had stayed in the system to try and break it, and instead, the system had swallowed them. "Flee," Jesus whispered, and his voice was so full of grief I felt like I was going to snap in half. I told them to flee. I told them that when they see the abomination, the only answer is the mountains. One man, I saw him clearly. He was a pastor. He was standing on the back of a truck, holding a Bible. He was telling his people to stay and defend the church. He said, "God will not let this house fall." And Jesus looked right at that man and said, "I already left that house. Why are you still there?" The pastor couldn't hear him, of course. He was too busy being a hero. He was too busy being brave. And while he was talking, a black van pulled up. Not a tank, not a war machine, just a plain black van. Two men in suits with that same rotten lining stepped out. They didn't even have guns. They just had a tablet. They tapped a button, and the pastor he stopped talking. He looked confused. He walked into the van like a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. It wasn't a fight. It was a harvest. "Lord," I said, and I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. "Why didn't you help them?" "I am helping those who listen," he said. Then he moved his hand again, and the vision shifted. I saw a different group. This one was small, maybe just a few families. They weren't in a warehouse. They were in a garage, and they were packing bags. They weren't taking much. Just some water, some sturdy boots, a few Bibles. I saw a woman. She looked a bit like Maria. She was looking at a photo of her wedding, and she wanted to put it in her bag. She hesitated. I could see the thread of her heart pulling her toward that photo. But then she looked up. It was like she could see the gold thread in the air. "No," she whispered. He said, "Don't go back for anything." She put the photo back on the table. She grabbed her child's hand, and they walked out the back door. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have a map. They just started walking toward the hills. And as they walked, I saw something. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't a light, but it was like the air around them became thicker, more solid. The towers were spinning, the cameras were looking, but they couldn't see this family. It was like they had been stitched out of the world's fabric. They were moving through a hidden seam. "These are the ones who pray for the flight," Jesus said. "They don't ask for the power to win. They ask for the grace to obey." I watched them reach the mountains. There was a place there, a canyon that looked dry and dusty. But when they walked into it, I saw smoke from a small fire. There were others there. They were sharing a pot of beans. They were sitting on the ground. It was hard, they were cold, but they were alive. And more than that, they were free. The system couldn't touch them there because they had nothing left for the system to hold on to. They had lost their cloaks, Jesus said, but they found their lives. I felt a sudden, heavy pressure on my chest. I think I'm back in the hospital now. No, wait. I'm in my chair. Maria is still in the kitchen, but the memory is so strong. I remember asking him, Lord, what is the one prayer? The one you told me not to pray? He looked at the city, at the warriors being led into the vans, and at the counterfeit man smiling on the screen. Do not pray for me to change my mind, he said. When I say flee, do not pray for me to tell you to stay and fight. So that is not a prayer of faith. That is a prayer of pride. And pride is the thread the enemy uses to pull you into his pattern. I wanted to ask more, but the ridge was dissolving. The gold letters were turning into white smoke. I felt my heart, my physical heart, give a great lurching thump. Thump, like a heavy footstep. Thump. The smell of the cedar was gone. The salt from Maria's soup was in the air. I opened my eyes and I saw the hospital ceiling again. The white tiles. The fluorescent lights that hum like a beehive. I tried to move my fingers. They felt like they were made of lead. Mom? It was Maria. She was leaning over me. Her eyes were red. I'm here, I whispered. You've been out for so long, she said. I looked at her blouse, the floral pattern. It still didn't line up at the seams. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I didn't want to fix it. I just wanted to tell her to get her shoes. Maria, I said, and my voice was a ghost of a thing. We have to pray. We are, Mom. Everyone at the church is praying for you to get better. They're praying for you to be strong and get back on your feet. I closed my eyes. They were praying for the wrong thing. They were praying for me to stay in the house. I'm 72. My legs are swollen. I can barely walk to the bathroom without getting winded. But I'm sitting here in this wheelchair, and I'm looking at the hills through the window. I'm not praying to get better anymore. I'm praying for the flight. I'm praying that when the time comes, I'll have the strength to leave the sewing machine and the photos and the salt in the soup. I'm praying that I won't be a hero. I just want to be obedient. There's something about the way Rosa describes that hidden seam, the family that walked out and became invisible to the towers. I've heard a few stories now that mention this kind of supernatural protection for people who just walked away from the system. It's almost like the world can only see you if you're trying to engage with it or fight it. I keep coming back to that pastor on the truck. He thought he was being a giant for God, and Jesus says, I already left that house. That's a terrifying thought, isn't it? That we could be defending a building or a cause in God's name, and God is already miles away waiting for us in the mountains. I'm still sitting with that question about the lining. If you're a builder, a mechanic, or an engineer, how do you see the wrongness in things? Is it a sound? A feeling of a structural crack? I really want to know if Rosa's seamstress view is just one way of seeing a much larger truth. Please tell me in the comments. It's how I figure out how these stories fit together. It's Wednesday. I think it's Wednesday. Maria brought that soup today, and she only makes that on her day off, so it has to be. I've been home since Monday. 2 days. 2 days in this chair, looking at my hands. They look like old paper, don't they? All the veins showing through, like blue thread that's been pulled too tight. The hospital, it was 5 days of being pinned down. That's how it felt, like I was a piece of fabric pinned to a cutting board. And all these people in white coats were leaning over me, trying to figure out where the seam had ripped. They gave me papers when I left, a whole stack of them. Care instructions, they call them. Like I'm a delicate blouse you have to wash by hand in cold water. But my mind isn't on the papers. It's back in the canyon. After Jesus showed me the families fleeing, the ones who didn't go back for their cloaks, he took me right into the middle of them. We were standing in this place. It was dry, lots of red dust and scrub brush. It looked like the kind of place you'd go to die of thirst. I saw that family again. The woman who looked like Maria, she was sitting on a rock, and she was mending a tear in her child's sleeve. She didn't have a needle. She was using a sharp thorn and a piece of string she'd pulled from the hem of her own skirt. I watched her for a long time. She wasn't crying. She looked focused. There were maybe 30 people in this little camp. They had some old tarps for shade, and I saw a man pouring water from a plastic jug into a small cup. He only poured a little bit, maybe 2 fingers worth, and he gave it to an old woman sitting near him. "Is this it?" I asked Jesus. "Is this what they get for obeying? A desert and a cup of water?" He looked at them, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. Not the bad kind of pride, but the kind a father has when his child finally gets a difficult stitch right. "They are outside the weave," he said. I didn't understand. "The world is a pattern of control," he told me. "The leader you saw, the system with the towers, that is a fabric made of fear. But these people, they tore themselves away from it. They chose to be rags in the desert rather than part of that beautiful rotten suit." He walked over to the fire where a pot was hanging. It didn't smell like Maria's soup. It smelled like nothing, just hot water and maybe a few wild herbs. But when the man with the water jug brought the pot around, everyone took a spoonful, and as they ate, their faces, they didn't look hungry. They looked solid. "I provide for the flight," Jesus said. "I don't provide for the stay. Those who stayed in the cities to fight for their rights, they are eating the leader's bread, and it is turning to ash in their mouths. But these ones, they are eating the truth." Suddenly, the air in the canyon changed. It wasn't a wind, it was a weight. You know when you're trying to sew a very heavy piece of denim, and the machine starts to struggle? You can feel the motor straining, the needle vibrating, because the material is just too thick? That was the air. Jesus turned his head, looking toward the horizon. "It is time," he said. I looked where he was looking. The sky wasn't opening up with lights or anything like that. It was more like a giant hand had grabbed the corners of the world and just started to pull. The blue of the sky started to stretch and thin out. I could see the backside of reality. And then he was there. I don't know how to say this right. In the pictures, the white horse looks like a fairy tale. But this horse, it was massive. It looked like it was made of solid white stone, but it was moving. It had these heavy, iron-colored hooves that didn't just step on the ground, they seemed to claim it. Every time a hoof hit the dirt, a ripple went out for miles. And Jesus, he wasn't the man with the dusty hem anymore. He was sitting on that horse, and he was wearing a robe that looked like it had been dipped in a vat of deep, dark red. It wasn't a pretty color. It was the color of a job that had to be done. His eyes, they weren't heavy with sadness anymore. They were like 2 coals in a furnace. He didn't have a sword in his hand. He didn't need one. I saw the charismatic leader again. He was in his city, standing on his stage, and he looked up. For the first time, the silk suit looked cheap. For the first time, he looked like a doll made of straw. He tried to speak into his microphone, but no sound came out. Jesus just took a breath. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a scream. He just let out a long, slow breath. And the towers, those spinning things that were watching everyone, they just crumpled. They didn't explode. They just lost their hold. They fell over like they were made of wet paper. The screens went black. The silent monitoring stopped. The whole weave of the system just unraveled in a second. The leader, he didn't even put up a fight. He just withered. He shrank down until there was nothing left but that black, greasy lining I'd seen before, and then even that was gone. "It was never a war, Rosa," Jesus said. His voice was like a thunderclap that stayed in your bones. It was just a lie that needed to be told it was over. The people in the canyon, the woman with the thorn needle, the man with the water, they stood up, they weren't afraid. They looked at the horse and the rider, and they just started walking toward him. They didn't have to run. They didn't have to shout. They just belonged there. I felt a sudden, terrible tug at my waist. This is where the story turns. I've read a lot of accounts where the end of the world is this long, drawn-out battle with tanks and planes. But Rosa sees something completely different. She sees a system that is so fragile, it only takes a single breath from Jesus to make it fall apart. I can't stop thinking about that one phrase, "I provide for the flight, I don't provide for the stay." It changes how I hear that specific warning in Matthew 24. It's not just a command to run. It's a promise that if you do, there's a different kind of provision waiting for you. A provision that doesn't look like much, a thorn needle, a spoonful of soup, but it's enough to keep you outside the weave. I keep wondering about the prayer she mentioned earlier. The one thing Jesus told her not to pray about. I think we're about to hear why that one choice is the difference between being in that canyon or being in the van. The tug was getting stronger. It felt like someone had caught a loose thread on my soul and was reeling me in. Wait, I cried. I haven't seen the rest. What happens to the people who were in the vans? What happens to the warriors? Jesus looked down at me from the horse. He looked so far away, even though he was right there. Tell them the truth, Rosa, he said. Tell them that I am not looking for their strength. I am looking for their ears. Tell them to stop praying for me, to help them fix a world I have already judged. But they love you, I shouted. I was crying now, the tears feeling hot and real on my face. The ones who stayed to fight, they thought they were doing it for you. Obedience is better than sacrifice, he said. It's a verse I've heard 1,000 times, but hearing it from him while the world was unraveling, it felt like a sentence. If they pray to stay, they will stay, he said. And they will be part of the fire when it comes. Tell them to pray for the flight. Tell them that the only prayer that matters when the abomination stands is, Lord, give me the feet to run and the heart to not look back. Then he reached down. He didn't touch me, but he made a motion like he was cutting a thread. Snap. I felt it in my chest. Suddenly, I was being forced into a garment that was way too small for me. It was itchy. It was tight. It was heavy. It was my body. I heard the beep, beep, beep. It was so loud, it sounded like a hammer hitting a tin roof. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like they were glued shut with grit. I could taste copper in my mouth. My throat was dry, drier than the canyon. She's coming around, a voice said. It wasn't a voice from the ridge. It was a flat, tired voice. A nurse. I opened my eyes, and for a second, the light was so white I thought I was back on the ridge. But then I saw the drip bag. I saw the plastic tubing. I saw the linoleum floor. I stayed in that bed for 5 days. They did tests. They poked me with needles. They told me my heart had stopped for over 4 minutes. They said it was a miracle I didn't have brain damage. They kept using that word, miracle. But the only miracle I saw was a woman in a canyon with a thorn needle. On the 4th day, the pastor from my church came to visit. He's a good man, Pastor Bill. He's always been kind to me. He sat by my bed and he took my hand. Rosa, he said, we were all so worried. We were praying so hard for the Lord to preserve you, to keep you here with us so you could keep serving the ministry. I looked at him. He was wearing a nice suit. It was a dark navy, well-tailored. And for a second, just a second, I saw his lining. It wasn't rotten like the charismatic leader, but it was thin. It was a lining made of doing. It was made of committees and building funds and keeping the church doors open at any cost. Pastor, I said. My voice was just a rasp. Did you pray for the flight? He looked confused. He smiled that smile he uses when he thinks someone is being a bit eccentric. We prayed for your healing, Rosa. And look, the Lord answered. No, I said. He didn't. He just sent me back to tell you to stop. He patted my hand and stood up. He told me to get some rest. He said I'd feel better once the medicine wore off. But it's been 7 days since my heart stopped. I've been home for 2, and I don't feel better. I feel ready. Maria is in the kitchen again. She's singing a hymn while she cleans up the soup bowls. She sounds so happy. She thinks her mother is back and everything is going to be like it was. She's already talking about me coming to the church luncheon next month. I'm sitting here in this wheelchair, and I'm looking at my sewing basket. There's a piece of bias tape sticking out of the side. It's the same color as the dust on the ridge. I'm not going to that luncheon. I'm 72 and I don't have much left. My sewing machine is old. My house is small. My photos are fading. I'm looking at the mountains through the window. They look so solid. I'm not a hero. I'm just a woman who knows how a garment is put together. And I can tell you, the seams of this world are coming apart. You can feel the tension in the air. You can hear the threads snapping if you listen close enough. The charismatic leader is coming. The system is already being built. The towers are already spinning, even if we can't see them yet. And when the time comes, when the abomination stands in the holy place, I'm not going to pray about whether to leave. I'm not going to ask God if he wants me to stay and witness or fight the good fight. I'm just going to leave my cloak on the chair. I'm going to grab Maria's hand and we're going to walk toward the hills. I hope I see you in the canyon. I hope we can share a spoonful of beans and talk about the horse and the rider. But for now, I'm just sitting here. The thread is running out. What Rosa said at the end there about the pastor praying for her to stay and keep serving, it makes me think about how much of our faith is built around staying put. We build buildings, we start ministries, we settle in. And yet, the one thing Jesus was most specific about in the end times was the exact opposite. He said, run. It's the one prayer he told us not to pray. Don't pray for permission to stay. I can't get the image of that white horse out of my head. Rosa described it as being made of stone but moving, something so solid it makes our world look like a stage set. I keep wondering if that's the real secret, that when you see something that real, leaving your house or your car doesn't feel like a sacrifice anymore. It just feels like common sense. I really want to hear from those of you who work with heavy, real things. If you're a mason or a welder or someone who builds things to last, does Rosa's description of the solidness of that vision make sense to you? Does it match how you recognize something that's built right? I'm still gathering these stories, and your perspective is the one I'm listening for next. If this story raised a question for you about the prayer, about the flight, about how you describe that same moment, I want to hear it. It's the kind of thing that shapes how I listen to the next story. So please, tell me. Leave it in the comments. It really does help me think. Rosa's story adds one more piece to the collection, but it leaves me wondering about the people who aren't ready to let go of the thread. I'm going to be sitting with her sewing basket for a long time.